So, do you remember when you were a kid, people used to ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it seemed so easy. It was like you had to pick something. Like you could be a fireman or a doctor or a teacher. I had this problem where I could never pick. And so when someone asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I just used to say that I wanted to be tall. And then when I got to about 9, I remember this man came to our house, and he was a friend of my parents, and he was an entrepreneur. And he told me about how he'd started hotels and restaurants and gyms, and it just sounded so exciting. It sounded like the one job that you didn't have to pick something. And so from then on, when someone asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, which actually went down quite well when you're about 9. It's a good answer. When I got to high school, it started to get a bit more serious. And I remember my very first day of high school sitting in this really big hall full of about 100 or several hundred 13-year-old girls, and our headmistress comes in and gives us a talk about our careers. It was a talk about our future. And she wanted us to start thinking about what kind of jobs we would do when we left school so that we could start to pick the right subjects and get good grades in those subjects so we could get into the courses in university that would lead us to those jobs. And we were taught to think of our careers kind of like an escalator. So the idea is that once you finish studying, you get on the bottom of the escalator. You get like some kind of entry-level position. Then if you work hard and you don't upset anyone too much, when you hit your kind of 30s and 40s, you'll make your way up to mid-level management, and then your career will continue to progress in this pretty orderly, steady manner till you get to senior management. Then when you hit 60, you retire, you step off the escalator, and you make room for other people who are coming up. And this is definitely how most of my friends thought about their careers. And I remember them telling me what they were going to do, and they all went and did the right things. They picked a profession, they did the right courses, they got good marks, they got an entry-level position, they worked hard, and they thought that they were going to continue to make their way up the escalator in this kind of orderly way. But it just doesn't seem like it's working out like that. In the past, I think it's like 5 to 10 years, I've noticed that about half of my friends, at least half of them, got kicked off the escalator. They got made redundant. And nobody tells you what to do. Like, no one tells you that's going to happen. No one tells you what to do when that happens, when you get laid off. And a lot of them have really struggled. They might have chosen professions like maybe they went to work at a newspaper, or they wanted to work at a record company or an investment bank, and they got really stuck. And most of them have either had to take a big step backwards, or a lot of them still, every day, comb Seek.com, looking at the job ads, trying to figure out how they can keep making their way up the escalator. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I just think that there has to be a better way. It's like, we saw the Ken Robinson talk earlier, and he said that there's a revolution going on. And there is, and the revolution is affecting the job market that we're in right now. It's like industries are collapsing. Companies that used to take decades to grow are rising in months, and they're falling in months. Companies are outsourcing jobs to cheaper countries. And this whole escalator system, it just feels like it's broken. Older people are staying in work longer. They're not getting off. The whole thing is jammed, and we're all stepping on top of each other. So I think we really need to start to rethink how we look at our careers. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I think that the only way forward is for us to start all thinking of ourselves as being entrepreneurs. And before I go into what I mean by that, I just want to have a look at kind of where we've come from. So about 40,000 years ago, a lot of us lived in caves. And back then, we were all entrepreneurs, right? We were all self-employed. So we all went out, we had to get our own food, we had to constantly reinvent new ways of doing things. We didn't have the sense that anybody owed us anything. Then around about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, we started settling down. We built communities, and we invented this idea of labor. And we changed how it is that we started to change how we saw ourselves. And, here we go. And a really good example of this, I don't know if any of you guys heard of this idea of the salary man in Japan, the culture of the salary man. I just think it's a good example. It's a culture that grew out of the Second World War in Japan, where when you left school, if you could get into a corporation young, you became part of a tribe, and they all even wear the same clothes in most companies. And you have a job for life. And that is seen as the pathway to job security. That is the pathway to being part of the middle class. The problem really hit in the 90s when the Japanese economy crashed, and hundreds of thousands of people were all of a sudden laid off. And in 1 year, 1998, the suicide rate in Japan increased by 35% just in that 1 year, and it's almost all men, and it's almost all attributed to job loss. So yeah, it feels to me like the same kind of thing's happening in Australia. I mean, I watch the news, and it seems like whole industries are collapsing. This month, you might have seen, we hit a 10-year high in Australia's unemployment rate. So we've got to think of a new way forward. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently because it's really affecting my personal peer group. And so my solution that I've come up with is for everyone to become an entrepreneur. So what do I mean by that? I don't mean that everybody has to go out and start a business. I think that would be crazy. Starting a business is really stressful. Only some people should start businesses. I just think that everyone needs to start thinking of themselves as being a business. So you are the CEO and founder of you. And I have started lots of businesses. Some of them have worked and a lot of them haven't worked. But underpinning everything has been this idea that I'm creating myself as the ultimate business. And so this is my idea. So when I go to start a business, there are 6 things that I focus on. And the first is culture. So every company has to have a strong culture, because without a strong culture, nothing else is really possible. And I think it's the same thing for us as human beings in the workforce. We have to establish our own culture. And I don't mean where you've come from. I mean, what are your values? Like, what is important to you? What is it that you want to do? Who is it that you want to be? And these are just when I started thinking about my culture, these are 3 things that I am most passionate about. I have to do something that I'm passionate about. It's very important for me to be doing something where I can be creative every day, and integrity is a huge part of my personal culture. It's something that I hope underpins everything that I do. Everyone's values and culture will be different. This is just mine. But I think that once you can define it, this can be the basis for everything else that you do. What is it that you want to do? How are you going to treat people? Right through to how you speak, even how you dress. So once you've got your culture worked out, then I think you can start to think of yourself as a product. And I just really like Gmail as an example, because Gmail has been around for a really long time, and I use it and I love it. But if you notice, Gmail still says that it's in beta. It's got a little beta at the top of the screen under the Gmail. So that means that it's not finished. It's constantly improving it and changing it. And I think that we need to think of ourselves as being products that are permanently in beta. So I had a music company in my 20s, and it was cruising along pretty well, but I'd stopped learning. And so I decided to pack it in and embark on this crazy journey of creating a tech startup, which I knew nothing about, and I'm sure financially I'm much worse off for it at this point in my life anyway. But in terms of creating myself as a product, I've built all of these new skills. I've had so much of a richer experience that through building myself, thinking of myself holistically as a product, I've done much better. I'm much better off for having taken that risk and continued learning, continued developing myself. The next is thinking of yourself as a brand. And I know it sounds really cheesy to think of yourself as a brand, and I personally hate it, but realistically today we are all brands. So these are just some of the ways that I build my brand. But if you're, say, a doctor, you can build your own brand. So do community work, speak at seminars. Building a brand is about becoming known in your community for whatever it is that you're good at. Next is building a network. So I can't tell you as an entrepreneur how important it is to continually work on building your network. So I'm always looking for new mentors, looking for people that can teach me things, looking to broaden my base of people that I know and people that I can call on, because that's how you learn, and that's often where opportunities come from. So I think in terms of building ourselves as a business, we've got to build our brand, and then we've also got to build our network. This is something that's kind of magic. It's this idea of breakout opportunities. And every entrepreneur knows that sometimes it doesn't matter how much work you put in. It's all about looking for these magic moments. And this is just a good example from my personal career. I used to manage this band called Evermore. And we really worked hard with Evermore. We slugged it out for years. touring up and down the country, and we built this kind of small but loyal fan base. And then one day, I was watching Channel 10, and I noticed that there's this new show starting called The OC. And Channel 10 were playing the ads for this show every single ad break, so it was obvious that it was going to be a really big thing. And so I called up the reception at Channel 10 and said, "Hey, my name's Rebekah, I manage this band called Evermore. Can I speak to the guy who makes the promos for the OC?" And they put me through to this producer guy, and I said, "Hey, I think I've got a song that would be great in your commercial." And he was really excited to get my call. He'd never had a phone call from anyone in the music industry before. And so he said, "Okay," it was Friday afternoon, he said, "Send the CD across to me now. I'm just making the commercial for next week." And so I couriered across the CD. He called me back a couple of hours later and he said, "I love it. It's going to be in the commercial this Sunday night," which happened to be the night that the Big Brother finale was on. Anyway, Channel 10 used that song as the theme song for the OC in Australia for the next 4 or 5 months. It eventually made it onto the American soundtrack as well. The song became a huge hit purely off the back of that show. The band went from playing to 150 people to selling hundreds of thousands of albums. And it wasn't necessarily just because we slugged it out, although that was important. It's all about looking for these like little opportunities and then just seizing them and being aware of them. And that's often, I think in your own career, that's often where the magic happens. And then the last one is really important, and that's about learning how to adapt. And this is an example from a friend of mine, a friend's company. A friend of mine in New Zealand spent about $5 million and 4 years building this really amazing video conferencing software. And it was really secure and it worked incredibly well. It was very clear. But when he'd finished it, he couldn't get any customers because in the time it had taken to build it, competitors had come along that were able to give cheaper solutions. So he was totally stuck. And then one day, a friend of his mother had passed away, and he asked if they could put their software, their system, into the funeral parlor so they could stream the funeral around the world for all of their friends and family over in the UK who couldn't make it to the funeral. And so they did this. It was a huge success. And the funeral parlor was so happy. He said, "Hey, can you leave the system in here so that we can let everyone, can we buy the system off you?" And so he was like, "Hang on, maybe there's a market here." And since then, he's now in this business is called One Room. They're in every single funeral parlour in New Zealand. They're in thousands of funeral parlours in Australia, and they're just about to enter. I think they're about to secure 40,000 funeral parlours in the United States. So it's now an incredibly successful business, purely, and it's not at all where the entrepreneur expected to end up. But he just, it didn't work the first time, and then he just, looked for other opportunities and learnt how to adapt to his surroundings. So yeah, it's the same in our own careers as well. You may study to work in a newspaper and find that by the time you get there are no such things as newspapers anymore, but it's about looking for whatever the next opportunity is, and it may be something that will take you totally by surprise. So I just made all this stuff up. Like, we don't know, no one really knows how we're supposed to think about our careers. So I think my generation is really the first generation in a really, really long time, since we kind of started settling and making communities, that cannot rely on job security at all. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that that's the way that it is. So these are just my ideas. I think that you can, if you think of yourself as a company, if you build a culture that's based on your passions and your values and define yourself, you think of yourself as a product that's always in beta, and you always look for ways to improve and grow. You build a brand in your community, you become known for whatever it is that you're good at. You build a powerful network who can give you opportunities. You look for these really magic breakout opportunities that will be around you all the time. It's just a matter of spotting them and seizing them. And then you learn how to adapt. I think that by doing all those things, we have a shot. Thank you very much.